Trump truly believed the election was stolen, according to a person briefed on the matter. What do you make of that?
So what I make of that is that if you're the prosecutors, you want to know what everyone would say if this were to go to trial. You would certainly want to know what the people closest to Trump would say, because you wouldn't want there to be any surprises. You wouldn't want Jared Kushner to say, well, actually something, that's very surprising that could upend what you know. So you want to have all the facts before you go forward, because someone like Jared Kushner could be called by the defendant, Donald Trump, to testify. So while Kushner's testimony, based on our reporting, does not get the prosecutors there on this question of intent, question of whether he acknowledged that he lost, it's important for them to know that if they do go to trial, that is what Jared Kushner would say. So if you're them, you'd want to assess that and say, okay, can I live with that or can I not live with that? And, it's not that severe of a thing. So my guess is that would probably be something they could live with.
All right, Michael Schmidt, great reporting. Thanks for coming on the show. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Mary McCord is the former acting assistant attorney general for national security at the Department of Justice. She's co-host of Prosecuting Donald Trump podcast, which you can get wherever you get your podcasts or by scanning the QR code there. Noah Bookbinder is the president and CEO of Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington. He's one of the authors of a model prosecution memo published today of what a Trump indictment for January 6th might look like. Welcome, both of you. And Noah, let me start with you, because you are one of the authors of this very long document that works just off publicly available information that we have through January 6th committee and reporting. How important is intent here, corrupt intent? How important is it establishing that privately he knew he'd lost and was still, trying to retain power?
Well, as a legal matter, it's not essential, in the sense that even if somehow he thought he won, you're still not allowed to gin up fake electors. You're not allowed to pressure the vice president to reject electoral college votes. You're certainly not allowed to incite a violent insurrection. But it's tremendously important for persuading a jury, and as you talked about earlier, persuading the American people that this is an appropriate prosecution. So I think you can make the case without it, but it's a much, much stronger case if you have that evidence. And certainly based on what we've seen publicly, there's really strong evidence that he did know that he lost the election, that he went forward anyway. And certainly the reporting today, despite what Jared Kushner reportedly said, and you got to take that kind of thing with a grain of salt, because the sources of reporting about what happens in the grand jury are generally the witnesses themselves. But even if that's right, I think that doesn't do a lot to take away from the weight of the evidence that Donald Trump knew exactly what he was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking about it's such a strange thing, because this comes up time and time again with him. It came up in the classified documents case. Like, is he delusional? Is he so, divorced from reality? He believes the thing he's saying. Does he know that what he's saying is not right? I mean, ultimately, right, if you walk into a bank and you stick up the teller because you believe they have your money, even if you genuinely believe you're not in good shape. So, like, in the end, like, the transgressions here strike me as fairly black letter, independent of the intent. But to Noah's point, it does matter for convincing a jury.
It absolutely does, and I couldn't agree more. But I think that you're right, Chris, that this pattern we see with Trump, I mean, a lot of it is playing to the public, but I think he knows juries, grand juries and petit juries, the ones who sit in trial, are also all part of that public that he's been playing to for so long. And in every matter, what he does is he creates, in a way, this alternate reality for himself. In the Mar-a-Lago documents case, it's that he had the power to determine that all presidential records were actually personal records. Or on a different day, as Nicole Wallace would say, on, Earth 2, he might also say that he actually declassified them all. And then he lives in that world, I think, in order to almost create what he thinks is going to be a defense. I can't have committed a crime when I was so openly out there saying these things. But that's just not how the law works. And I think that that's going to fail in this case if there is an indictment brought, and if that's what he tries. His purported lack of knowledge that he lost is not going to be a legal defense here.
Let me follow up with you about timing here, Mary, because you worked at the Department of Justice. You know, there's this sense, and I've heard from people, Andrew Weissman and others, who seem to think that Jack Smith would want to move on indictments, were there be any, and we don't know if they are, before Fani Willis, and we have a pretty decent sense now that this grand jury's impaneled that will be, if it happens, again, we don't know, in the next 3 weeks. What do you think of that?
I think there's two things that are really, urging haste for Jack Smith. One has nothing to do with Fani Willis. One is if there is any chance of getting to trial before the election, this matter's got to get indicted sometime soon. Even though under the Speedy Trial Act, you set a trial date within 70 days, there are all kinds of reasons for continuances and tolling of that Speedy Trial Act, and the clock is ticking. And the second is, of course, Fani Willis has been pretty open about the timing of potential indictments coming out of her office. And I do tend to agree with Andrew here. I mean, if I were the one prosecuting federally, I'd like to get ahead of that. But it wouldn't, even if he's not ahead of that, it wouldn't change whether he can get to trial, I think, before the election. Because when push comes to shove, if there was a problem with the timing, I think that the federal case would go first.
No, one of the, if I'm not mistaken, in the draft prosecution memo that you were sort of co-author on, one of the charges is conspiracy to defraud the U.S. And if I'm not mistaken, that's also one of the charges the January 6th committee looked at. And I have to say, as I look through it against as a layperson, that always is the one that jumps out to me. Basically, it's like, did you willfully try to defraud the government of the United States of something? And it's like, yeah, like the most important thing. Who would be the next leader of the country? What do you think about that charge?
I think in a lot of ways that's the most straightforward of the charges. I think there's an obstruction charge, obstructing a function of the United States government, which is also extremely straightforward. But the conspiracy to defraud the United States government is basically saying that you were lying, and you were doing it to prevent the United States government from doing a thing that it was supposed to do. And that's quite clear. There's so much evidence that Donald Trump, particularly through that false elector scheme, but also in trying to intimidate the Department of Justice to essentially lie, to put pressure on states. That Donald Trump was taking these taking these positions that he knew were false to try to stop